Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Monika Mruc, and I'm studying American Studies at the Jagiellonian University. For the next 10 minutes, step into a time machine and travel back to 1960s in the United States. Imagine a world where discrimination never existed. How different would society be today? What challenges would have been avoided? Would history have taken a different path? Abolition of slavery in 1865 was a turning point, and we all need to admit that. But the real battle for equality reached its peak nearly a century later. Today, we will explore why 1964 was more crucial in shaping America we know today than 1865. Welcome to post-Reconstruction South, where racial segregation wasn't just a social norm, it was the law. Jim Crow laws, enacted in the late 19th century, enforced separation between whites and persons of color in schools and public transport. And if you are pondering, who categorized as a person of color? Well, it was anyone of ascertainable or strongly suspected black ancestry in any degree. This law was later extended to cinemas, theaters, even cemeteries, because being a black meant being categorized as a second-class citizen, regardless of economic or social status. The black communities entered underfunded schools, limited political representation, and systematic disfranchisement. The efforts rippled through generations, deepening racial divisions in America. The infamous 1896, the Supreme Court ruling in the Plessy versus Ferguson upheld these laws under the doctrine separate but equal. However, reality painted a different picture. Separate, that's right, but vastly unequal. Imagine being a child in 1950s, knowing that your school lacks resources simply because of the color of your skin. School for black students hired fewer teachers, received less fundings, and provided superb education compared to white counterparts. And then came 1954, beacon of hope, Brown versus Board of Education. The Supreme Court declared that separated educational facilities were inherently unequal. But did it change reality overnight? Far from it. Resistance was fierce and integration slow. And these examples, which are presented on the slide, are even more frustrating because they both happened after this famous precedent. By 1960s, only one in 1,000 black students attended to white majority schools. In the same year, 43% of white adults were high school graduates, compared to 22% of black adults. It's 20% gap. And they started perceiving their inferior position. It was obvious that they needed to take considerable steps. And let me ask you a simple question. What is the easiest way to be noticed by the government? And the answer is present any kind of objection conducted by racial minorities. Now we are in the crowded city bus, Montgomery, Alabama, on December 1st, 1955. A weary seamstress, Rosa Parks, refuses to give up her seat to a white passenger. The single act of defiance sparked a revolution. Then local law dictated that African American needed to sit at the back of the bus, while the front section was for white people. But when the white section was full, of course, African American needed to give up their seats. But Rosa didn't do that. She was chosen to be a hero. And civil rights leaders decided to organize one day bus boycott. And they were speculating that probably it will be some kind of success, because buses in Montgomery were mainly dependent on African American riders. But it turned out to be a giant success, and they needed to extend it. And Montgomery bus boycott lasted for more than a year, despite, of course, threats and intimidation. And by 1956, the courts declared segregated bus seating unconstitutional. And the Supreme Court upheld this ruling in the mid-November. And it was proved that collective action could dismantle injustice. And the courage of ordinary people, the standing together, fueled the larger civil rights movement. Fast forward to August 28th, 1963. The air is thick with anticipation, as over 250,000 people gathered at the Lincoln Memorial. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. takes a podium. His words reverberate history. I have a dream. He calls for an America where all races could live in a harmony. He condemns police brutality and urges immediate change. His speech was more than rhetoric. It was a rallying cry that ignited hopes and mobilized action. He referred to Americans' values to move people's hearts and thoughts. And the March on Washington was a defining moment of the civil rights movement. The change was slow, but the pressure from marches, boycotts, speeches forced Congress to act. On the July 2nd, 1964, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act into law that outlaws discrimination based on religion, race, color, sex, and national origin. Racial segregation was banned. Discriminatory voting laws were struck down. Of course, fight wasn't over, but the victory was within reach. Dr. Martin Luther King said that it was nothing less than the second emancipation. And he was right. It was nothing less. Because this landmark law paved a way for Voting Rights Act of 1965 and Fair Housing Act of 1968, further securing African American rights. And we all know that racism didn't just magically vanish in 1964. Inequalities persisted. Struggle continued. But the victories in the civil rights movement transformed America. And the efforts of activists, leaders, everyday people carved a path toward greater equality. And the question is, how do we carry this legacy? Because the story of civil rights isn't just a history. It's a call to action for every generation. And these all elements that I have above mentioned, we know they contributed greatly to the main accomplishment, which was Civil Rights Act. Now we know also that it was long and exhausting process, which included ups and downs, and efforts of everyone. And by saying everyone, I mean ordinary people, but also various organizations like NAACP, which were constantly fighting and working for their mutual success. We can draw a conclusion that 13th Amendment didn't put end to racial segregation or discrimination. And 1865 was not as prominent year as it should be, and as African American expected it to be. They need to wait to 1964 to become real citizens. But as we reflect on this journey, let's remember that the change is possible when people are standing together for justice. And we need to keep in mind that our past has shaped the present, and our actions will shape the future. But the main question is, how and what role will you play? Make a pause in this constant rush and think about it. Think about what I've said. Thank you.